the tsunami, we felt God calling us to come up into this area. And my wife is Japanese, so she grew up in Tokyo. And actually, on that first trip that I went to work with her church, I met Pastor Kondo, who was at the time in seminary in Tokyo. He later became the pastor of Morioka Bible Baptist Church. So he was good friends with Tomo's family because Tomo's father was the pastor of the church that I was working with. And so when the tsunami hit, we knew that he was working in that area. So we contacted him to see if they needed help or what the needs were. And he invited us to come and partner with them. So yeah, so we've been in Japan as a family doing missions work since 2013. So we got there about 2 years after the tsunami. Yeah, it took us a little while to finish raising support and to get over there. But kind of our heart all along was we felt like, we weren't going to be able to get there to be on the ground for the initial months and the disaster relief. But really our prayer was that through the work that was beginning there, that God would open the door for church planting and for further ministry. And again, like I didn't speak any Japanese at all when we got there. So I wasn't ready to do that kind of work. So there's going to be some prep time. But yeah, so that was sort of our thought was, well, let's get to Iwate at least. Let's start preparing for this and just pray that God opens the door. And so what I'm going to go through today is I want to just talk about what we've been doing and what's been going on, particularly in Iwate, but this is kind of fairly relevant, I think, for a lot of similar stuff going on in the other prefectures that were affected by the tsunami. Just in the over the last 10 years, and talk about some of the ways that God has really been working through this, because it's just amazing how God can take such terrible tragedies and really through that open up doors to share his love and to bring hope and relief to people. And in spite of so many terrible things that happened on that day, out of that, we've seen God work in some really amazing ways. And it's just been really encouraging, I think, to think about how God can take something like that and bring something good out of it. And so that's kind of what I want to try and get across to all of you guys today. I think we mentioned before, I'm a missionary with JEMS. So JEMS was able to send us up here to partner with Morioka Bible Baptist Church in this area. And like I said, we've moved from, let's see, I think I've got a picture. Let me bring up another little map here. So this is a picture of Iwate Prefecture. So you can see Morioka is where we started. And about 2.5 years ago, we moved down to Miyako to be involved in the church plant here. And initially we were partnering with one other missionary, Catherine Porter, who has been also ministering in this area. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with her ministry, but she's involved in a harp ministry. So this her and some of the ladies in one of the this is a community center, but this is in one of the area where a lot of the survivors were relocated after their houses were destroyed. So Catherine was working in this area, partnering also with Morioka Bible Baptist Church, and she was one of the missionaries that Morioka was supporting here in Miyako on the ground, and she really felt the need for a new church plant to be started. So she challenged Morioka to start a church plant, and we were at Morioka at the time, and so they asked us to go and join her. Kat is now back in the UK. She's from England, and she's back there on home service right now. So currently in Miyako, it's just me and my family are the only missionaries here. But yeah, that kind of picks you up a little bit about where we are. Just a couple of quick photos from the area to give you an idea of what it looks like. So this is the coast of Miyako. So you can kind of see looking out there. This is an area where they have this blowhole where the water shoots up, and it's pretty cool. And then just surrounding area. So we're in a very rural area. So lots of trees and rivers. And this is we just had a really beautiful fall season. So there were some changing colors on the leaves, and it's just, I don't know, like I'm from Orange County, so I'm not used to this at all, or seasons or any of that crazy stuff. But it's been fun. I think we were a little nervous about moving to such a rural place because Miyako is fairly rural area, much more rural than I've ever lived. And especially my wife who grew up in Tokyo. She's a little nervous about that too, but we've really loved it since we've gotten here. Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about just what the situation was from like a missions perspective or a ministry perspective prior to the tsunami, and we'll kind of walk through and talk about what's been happening as a result of that and how things have changed. So in Iwate in particular, there was some successful church planting efforts back in like from the 60s through the 80s. That's when Morioka Bible Baptist Church was planted, and that is a conservative Baptist church. And so there's a string of conservative Baptist churches that were planted in Iwate. There's three main ones, kind of four. And then I guess if you count our church plant, it would be kind of a fifth, but we're still technically part of Morioka Church. But the original ones were really planted back in the 60s through the 80s during that time when it seems like a lot of, it seems like in Japan, there was a lot more activity with church planting and a lot more thriving church planting efforts back then. But from around the 80s to the 90s, things started to really slow down. So the initial church planting efforts were done in partnership with international missionaries from America. The kind of second generation church planting, where those churches that were planted then started to try and, they were turned over to Japanese leadership, and then they tried to do church planting on their own. They met with a lot of difficulty in that. And there was, I'm still not 100% sure what all the main challenges were, but you had staff members having to leave the area, which threw things off. And then I think just a general, I don't know, it seems like in Japan, after their economy kind of started getting more booming, there was just a general difficulty in people doing church planting and people being less receptive to the gospel than maybe they were, when things were a little bit harder. But for whatever reason, that kind of second generation of church planting really stalled. And there was a lot of church plants that were attempted here that weren't able to be established. And as a result, most of the church planting efforts sort of were stopped. And so you were wound up with, 5 or 6 evangelical churches in the prefecture. And then by the early 2000s or so, basically all of the international missionaries had left the prefecture. I'm not aware of any international missions organization that had any church planting or ministry goals for Iwate Prefecture. So it was really just the Japanese believers that were there in those churches. And it was kind of, I think in that time, more of a survival mentality. There was at least one other church plant this time that did start up in the early 2000s. But for the most part, the Japanese churches were kind of, more trying to just survive in this difficult environment. And so, so again, when the tsunami actually hit in 2011, at the time in Iwate, there wasn't any international missions presence. There wasn't a really large Christian presence at all in the tsunami. And, tragically, to my knowledge, there wasn't really much of a Christian presence at all on the coast in these cities where the tsunami hit. Is one of, everyone says, Japan's one of the least reached places in the world, but the coastal cities that were hit by the tsunami are among the least reached cities in Japan. And again, they're very small communities, very difficult for missionaries to get into, and not many churches in those cities. It's just a very kind of difficult situation. Let me see if I got some. So let's talk about the disaster and what happened. So you guys are probably pretty well aware of all the statistics and everything, but just to recap, you had over 20,000 people died or missing, sorry, typo there, or missing as a result of the earthquake and tsunami and the nuclear power plant meltdown. So over 20,000 people dead or missing. Over 340,000 people in Japan displaced. And this is something that we really saw a huge impact of. There were so many people that were moved out of their homes and had to live in temporary housing. It was a situation that dragged on much longer than anybody anticipated. The original goal was for most people to be out of these temporary housing areas that were built to, let's see, we got a picture of them. So these were quickly put up in parks and in neighborhoods. And the idea was people supposed to be living here for like a year or two. And I think it took closer to 7 or 8 years before they finally closed the last of these. And so you had people living in very small, cramped environments, very thin walls, lots of tensions between neighbors, lots of difficulty and stress that people were going through in this living situation. Sort of a side challenge to this was that a lot of these temporary housing places, they were built in parks. And so that meant that the kids didn't have parks anymore, because now the parks were turned into these little mobile homes that people were living in. So that was a major challenge for a long time. So we can go back here. And then specifically in our city, so in Miyako is a population of about 50,000 people. And we had in just our city alone, about 500 people either died or missing still as a result of the tsunami. You had over 4,000 buildings destroyed, and the major industry here in Miyako is fishing, and almost the entire fishing fleet was destroyed as well. So you had just massive loss of life. We had all of these emotional and grieving. People were grieving the loss of grandparents and parents. Again, it was largely affected older people, but some people lost children as well. So you had this huge emotional burden that was taking its toll in the city. You had people, again, that were displaced and having to move around. So maybe they didn't lose any family members, but they lost their house and they lost all of their possessions and their livelihood, and they're having to be moved into some new place. And then you had just massive economic loss too, where the city hall was destroyed. This I don't know if you guys remember seeing some of the footage from the tsunami. This is one of the more famous video footages that came out, this water washing over the wall. This is actually in our city in Miyako, and is actually taken from the city hall. So the city hall was right there, getting completely incapacitated. They had to rebuild a totally new city hall. So the city government was affected. The industry was affected. The economy was affected. People were affected. It's just a unimaginable disaster in this area. So on so many different levels, people were struggling with loss and grief and all of these kinds of challenges. Let's see. Here we go. So, what did we do, or what did God do, or what was the response to that? Let's talk a little bit about that for a while, and talk about some of the things that happened. So, the group that we're working with is part of what's called the 311 Iwate Church Network. And this was a group of churches in Iwate. They were primarily inland churches. So Morioka Bible Baptist Church was one of the founding churches there. They banded together and they created a disaster relief network. So it was kind of a loose affiliation where they were trying to work together and partner together to just see if they could figure out what the needs were initially, and then try and coordinate response. So they were sending teams from the church, and they were on the ground within days. In fact, Pastor Kondo, our pastor of our mother church, he was, here in Miyako, a couple days after the disaster hit, and he was like literally going around finding people who were, stuck up in houses or on hills that, maybe they were in a house that was high enough on the hill where they didn't get their house destroyed, but all of the roads and everything underneath them was, so they didn't know where to go or what to do. And so he was going around finding people like that and telling them, where to go, where the disaster evacuation centers were, and trying to get them connected. And so for the first, obviously the first couple of days was just absolute chaos, but in the ensuing months and weeks, they were coordinating volunteers to come and help with cleanup. And, there were a lot of people that maybe their house wasn't completely destroyed. They were far enough inland that they just had a lot of, water and mud wash through their house. And so that was one thing that you didn't need professional workers to construction workers or someone to take care of. You could send volunteers in there to just, scoop mud out of people's houses and to clean things up. And so they were coordinating, volunteer teams from the churches to go down and to do that. And you started to get cooperation with Crash Japan. If you guys remember them, they're big in disaster relief. They're kind of a loose knit organization that when a disaster happens, they all kind of band together and rise to the occasion. But I think for the most part, it's made up of missionaries that primarily have other responsibilities in Japan. But yeah, so they connected with Crash and established a couple of bases throughout the area to receive supplies and do food distributions and to house volunteer teams that would come, so they'd have places for the volunteers to sleep and spend the night. And so the 311 Iwate Church Network was really involved in coordinating a lot of those kinds of efforts in the initial months. That kind of transitioned into a more sort of emotional support ministry as well. Whereas again, after the first 6 months to a year, most of the the actual disaster relief was done. People's houses that could be cleaned were cleaned as much as they could. People's houses who were destroyed, they had been moved into temporary housing situations. So there wasn't a need for cleaning or removing debris or getting people food. That kind of thing was, people were largely in a physically stable environment. But again, in the aftermath of such incredible loss, there were just huge emotional needs. And this was about the time that we arrived, is when the ministry was at about this stage where the physical work had been done, and now there was more of a need just for people to go and to talk with people and to listen to people and to give them kind of an outlet to share about the things that were on their hearts, the loss that they had experienced. And it was, I think it was a unique opportunity for people because, for the survivors of the tsunami, it was very difficult for them to share with other survivors about how they were feeling, because they were, they didn't want to burden others who were suffering. And it was also difficult to share with people who didn't lose anything in the tsunami. So people who were safe from the tsunami, there was this kind of little bit of survivor's guilt there, and just some interesting dynamics there where it was very difficult for people to talk about what had happened. But for an international worker or someone from outside the prefecture, or someone further away, to come just for the purpose of talking and meeting, they would come, they would bring tea and coffee and just have that time to chat. People seem to feel more open to sharing about that sort of thing. And so that became a ministry that lasted even till today. We're actually still doing that. We still go into some of the areas where either people have relocated from the tsunami, and we have, we call them ochako times, where it's like a little tea time where we'll go and we'll do arts and crafts, or we'll do different things and share with people. Let's see, I think I got a picture of that here somewhere. Yeah, so this is one of the recent ones that we've been involved in. And so again, you have the current situation now is there's no more the temporary housing. So everyone has either moved into a new permanent house, they've moved out of the area and moved in with family somewhere else, or they have been, the government has constructed permanent apartments specifically for people who lost houses. So there are some of these apartments that are basically completely filled with survivors from the tsunami or other disasters. Actually, and it was a few years back, we had a typhoon that hit Miyako as well. So it was kind of a little bit of a flashback for a lot of people, where you had not nearly the same scale, but a similar type of thing with flooding and houses destroyed and people losing houses, and there were deaths as a result of it too. So it's kind of like a mini, a miniature version of what happened in 2011. And so from that, there's now also some people that lost homes in the typhoon are now kind of living with the tsunami survivors in some of these apartments. And so we'll go in, working in cooperation with the local government to put on these kind of, little arts and crafts times or tea times or things like that, and just go and share and talk. These are kind of interesting. It's sort of an interesting dynamic working with the local government. It does limit us in the things that we're able to say. We can't be openly evangelistic or religious in these specific gatherings because of the restrictions that the local government puts on us. And in fact, you see the two ladies in there with the name tags. They're from the government, so they're often alongside with us. But that's, it's still something that we feel is very valuable. And just that opportunity, like obviously they know that we're Christians. We get little chances to share here and there in personal conversation, and just being able to kind of have that steadfast ongoing presence. I think one of the most amazing things from the tsunami has been the testimony of Christians just really sharing love in very practical ways. And I think there was, stories from earlier on. There were a lot of different groups that were coming in, and there was, at first there was just such huge needs that there were a lot of acceptance to pretty much anybody who would come. But as things progressed, there was for instance, there was I think it was the Communist Party in Japan was doing disaster relief, and they started trying to kind of recruit people to the political party, and because of that, they quickly got shut down and were not allowed to work with the city government anymore. And so you had things like that happening. There was a little bit of fear that people might try and take advantage of people in these disaster situations, and so I think there's a little bit more pressure to avoid having that appearance that, we're not really here for the people, we're here to sort of just make our own little group bigger or better, or that kind of thing. But anyways, that's sort of the situation with the work that goes on directly within the temporary housing, or not temporary, now permanent housing, or the community centers that we're working in. Let's see. Yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of a transition to the way things are today. And so let's talk a little bit about, just the current ministry and what's it like now, 10 years after the tsunami has hit. So let's talk about that. So our church plant here on the coast is called Miyako Megumi Christ Church. So Japanese Miyako Megumi Kristo Kyokai. Is our church plant. And so this is a church that it's meeting in our home right now. So we live in Iwate in Miyako. Let's see, we got a picture right here. So here's our home. So we have kind of a little bit of a larger size home, which we have 2 rooms down there that we can kind of use for ministry. So that's where we host the worship services. And we have been having a worship service in our house for let's see. Yeah. So basically since we got here, so we meet every Sunday for worship and prayer and a sermon. And I've been doing, so I preach 3 times a week or 3 times a month. 3 times a week would be a little rough. 3 times a month in Japanese. So it takes me a lot of time still. My Japanese is not that great. I'm still really working on that. So working through that. And then once a month, we listen to a sermon recording from Pastor Kondo and Morioka. So I get a little bit of a break then. So we're doing the church service. We have about three Christians in the town that are part of our church that are really faithful and come really regularly. And then 2 other Christians that kind of come from time to time. And so that's kind of our little church right now. So trying to encourage and disciple them in the midst of all of this. In addition to that, we're also doing some English outreach. So we do an adult and children's English outreaches, which has become a little bit difficult because of the COVID-19 situation. It's been harder to meet together, but for the most part, we've found ways to kind of do that with some social distancing and mask wearing. This is our kind of English night. So we do once a month English conversation time with people from the community. Invite people to come, and sometimes we have some of our church members come and be a part of that as well. And then for the kids English program that we've been doing, we try and get kids together, and I scare them by teaching them vowel sounds and proper pronunciation. It's just been a lot of fun doing this. And that's been, I think, one of the great things. So our kids are just such an easy way to get to know people and get to meet people. So most of our contacts are all through our kids and their friends and their friends' family. So they get to come and do that. Let's see, I think I have. Yeah. And then just recently we did a Christmas party. And so we rented a big hall. So we were able to kind of spread out a little bit for that and do a little Christmas program. We did a gift exchange there as well. And so kind of, through all of those kinds of things, we're able to do some, there we go, some outreach to the kids in the community too. So yeah, so kind of through these different ministries, sort of our goal and our hope is that one, we do want to support the community, and English is something that we can do to help that. Everyone is very interested in learning English, and I think by offering a positive benefit to the community is something that as Christians that we should do whenever we can. But in addition to that, we try and find ways to live out and to share our faith, to bring a little bit of a Christian content into these events specifically. But a large part of that is also once a month we have what we call Tomodachi Dehai, which is like a friend worship service for friends is kind of what it is. So it's the idea is, we talk about, different topics that might be more appropriate for non-believers. And we tell them that, yeah, look, this is a time for anybody to come to the church. Obviously anybody can come anytime they want, but if you need an excuse to come to church, once a month, we have this worship service that is open to anybody. And so kind of our hope is that by working with people in the English context, we can invite them sort of this kind of like next step sort of thing where they might be interested in coming and hearing about, maybe something topical that might be appropriate to them. And through relationships and through opportunities like these, they might kind of slowly be led to Christ and to the gospel. And that's kind of our hope and our kind of sort of our current strategy with the church planting outreach right now. And then I've already talked a little bit about the ministry to the tsunami survivors. So this has been kind of a direct continuation of the work that was started as a result of the disaster relief that began back in 2011. It's still ongoing today. We're working in three, but actually we're down to two locations now that we do once a month. We've been doing doing little ministry programs in two different locations. And it's, I think the last 2 months we've been shut down because of coronavirus. So that's, kind of depending on the situation, but it seems like next month we'll be able to do it again. Haven't talked too much about coronavirus and how it's affected us. We're actually, I think, a lot less affected than most places in the world. So our town of Miyako, we didn't have a single confirmed case of coronavirus until a couple of months ago. So for the most part, and Japan as a whole has been much more hands-off, like from a government perspective, than America. There hasn't been nearly as many government enforced shutdowns or restrictions. A lot of it has been very strong suggestions, and so it's kind of left largely out, especially out in our area in rural Japan. I think there's even less concern, like, not that it's not dangerous, but like people seem less concerned about it than in the larger cities. And so that's been a little bit of a stress for us recently. Is just, it kind of puts a lot of the pressure on us to make that call, because a lot of times we might be more cautious than a lot of the other people in the city. And then, people might be like, oh, well, why are you canceling things that no one else is canceling? But then on the other hand, you have, it's sort of a difficult thing, because then other people are going to be like, oh, you should cancel everything and we got to shut down. So it's kind of all over the place. But for the most part, I think we've been able to manage it pretty well. And it seems like, most people are okay with it. But that's kind of just an overview of our church plant here in Iwate and in Miyako. But there has been more things going on in other parts of the prefecture, other parts of the Tohoku region. And so this is something that was really encouraging to me. So again, when the tsunami hit, there was very little church planting efforts happening anywhere, and none on the coast. And right now you have 5 church plants in progress in cities that were hit by the tsunami. So this is like basically every major city on the coast now has some church planting going on. So this is just a huge change from, basically from 2010, from, before the tsunami hit, very little ministry at all. And now you have 5 coastal church plants happening right now. That in itself to me is just a really encouraging thing. So ours is just one of many that are now happening. And so, we're seeing church plants in Ofanato, Otsuchi, Yamada, Miyako, and then north of us in Taro. There's some church planting efforts going on. And kind of part of that is that there's been this renewed partnerships between the local Japanese churches and international missionaries. This is, again, prior to the tsunami, you had no international missionaries working in the prefecture at all, but as a result, or in some ways directly connected, some ways indirectly connected, you now have a much greater interest from the missions community to do ministry here in Iwate. And a large part of that, I think, is because of the just that reputation that Christians have gotten in the prefecture for the work that they've done. They really have, I think people have come to have a greater interest and trust in Christians that wasn't there before. I think there was a lot more suspicion prior to the tsunami, but because of the work that the church has done, there is more of a trust there, and more openness, and more opportunities for international believers to come and to work in these places. As we've been working in here, we really feel welcomed by the community. We've made a lot of good friends, and that was something that we were really nervous about. We heard about these coastal towns in Japan that were so close knit, and it was just impossible for anybody to break in. And when you get there, everybody's going to be like staring at you and judging you and watching every little thing that you do. And we haven't really experienced that. Our neighbor comes over and tells us when we took the wrong trash out on the wrong day, but he's generally pretty nice about it. And he's that's fine. It's good for us to know. And so we kind of work through. We made a number of mistakes, and for the most part, people have been gracious about it. Our kids have been really welcomed in the schools. They haven't experienced much bullying, which has also been really cool. I think our oldest Titus, he's in 3rd grade now, but he started in the tail end of 1st grade. So he was the one we were really worried about. And his Japanese was not too strong because he just came back from about a year in the US, straight into the second half of 1st grade in a new city. So we're kind of worried about him. And he started going the first couple days, and at first everyone was like just so fascinated with him because he didn't speak much Japanese and he spoke English. And I think he's the only one in the whole school who's a native English speaker. So he had a lot of people kind of making fun of him for that. Like they were trying to speak broken English to him and sort of make fun of him speaking English, but I don't think he realized that they were making fun of him. And so he was like really enjoying it. And in fact, there's like an older kid, who's like a 6th grader, that was always like, saying hello to him in a really thick Japanese accent, kind of a little bit of a mocking way. But Titus just thought it was hilarious because it wasn't very good English. So he thought it was like a joke. And so one day that kid was walking by when we were at the park, and he yells out to him. He's like, hey, do that thing you were doing to me again earlier, with me standing right there. And so now the kid's like super embarrassed and kind of just like shuffles off. And I think after that, nobody ever teased him about his English again. And he's been fine ever since. So he's been doing good. But yeah, just overall, the community's been really welcoming. And that was one of the kind of surprising things there. And I think that has, all of that, I think, ties into just the change in the dynamics in these coastal cities since the tsunami, where maybe they were more closed 10 years ago, like just socially and spiritually and in so many ways, but everything has been shaken up and displaced. New relationships have been made. People have had to see things from different perspectives. They have had more interaction with foreigners. There have been a lot of people from outside of Japan in these cities, where it was really uncommon to see anybody who wasn't Japanese before the tsunami, and now it's become more and more common, where people have had more interactions. There seems to be more interest in having interactions with international people than I've seen previously. So just a really different shift there. And I think part of that is one of the reasons there's been a lot more of a renewed interest for international missionaries to come and to work in this area, because not only in the coastal cities, we've also seen church plants happening inland as well. So as a result of that, you have OMF has really made a lot of an effort to do church planting. They have 2 church plants going on inland in Iwate. So that's really cool to see. Let's see if I got... That's it. Yeah. And then kind of in addition to that, not only international church planting happening, but the Japanese churches seem like they're starting to get more of an interest in church planting again as well. So just like Morioka Church is a great example of that. When I arrived in 2013, I remember talking to some people at the church about, if the church ever had any plans to do church planting. And, I was talking with some of the elders of the church, and they're like, no, we don't feel like we have the resources to do that. And it doesn't really seem like a real good possibility. But they were, the largest church in the prefecture that I was aware of, one of the largest evangelical churches. They had, they had a 50, 60 year existence, pretty strong group of about 60, 70 people. And so at first it was a little bit disheartening. I was like, so if an established church like this cannot do church planting, then can any church in this area do church planting? Or how is church planting going to happen? But again, that's one of the effects of this is, as they've been involved in disaster relief and kind of getting outside of their own local area and really catching more of a vision, particularly the younger people in the church have been so involved in this church plant and in praying for us and supporting us and talking to us and trying to help coordinate, volunteers coming down to work and to keep things going. I think that just things like that is also having an impact on the established churches as well, where they're catching a greater vision for the ways that God can use them and starting to step out and to do more. In fact, Morioka Church now, they have a second, or I guess this is a third area they're ministering in, where now there's a Christian camp up in near Kinshuko Lake, and they've started a worship service there now. So the camp director is a member of our church in Morioka, because the camp's about 2 hours away from Morioka, but they don't have a church in that area because it's a camp. So it's even more rural than where we are now. So very rural mountain area. But the camp director started hosting a worship service. And so that's now, kind of almost starting to look like another church plant. We're not calling it that. It's not officially a church plant, but it's seeming more and more like that. So it's really encouraging to see churches kind of have that heart to be involved in church planting again. And then, so again, Morioka Bible Baptist Church is part of the Conservative Baptist group here in Japan. So there's 3 other Conservative Baptist churches in Iwate. So kind of all 3 of them have been really involved in our church plant here in Miyako as well. So it's been interesting to see the ways that they've kind of come together to support and to do that. Let's see what else I got here. Thought I had a picture of Morioka Church, but I don't see it here. A couple of us just back up. Here's what our house looks like on Sunday mornings where I preach. So this is our little setup. We've been doing more and more Zoom services every once in a while with the coronavirus. If things flare up, we have people come in online. So sometimes we have a combination of people online and sometimes in person for that. I think you guys are probably pretty familiar with that, but same thing here. And then this is our group from, so Kat there in the middle, this was her last day at the church plant. So we had a lot of visitors this day. A lot of people were her friends that came and attended the church service. And if you see over on the far left of the picture, that's Tomo's parents. So Tomo's dad is working in Kamaishi, so another city that's hit by the tsunami. So he was pastoring the church in Tokyo. He's now, he moved up to Iwate after the disaster. He's been involved in disaster relief ever since. In a number of different roles. He initially was heading up a Christian disaster relief organization based here. He worked with OMF on a church plant in Yamada for a while, and now he's working with the city government in Kamaishi as a kind of as a survivor care worker. So he does a lot of the same kinds of work that we do. In addition to, as with his experience as a pastor, he goes and guest preaches at a lot of churches on Sunday and kind of pinch hits from time to time. So he was preaching that Sunday. But yeah, that's our little group there. Let me throw up some prayer requests and then I'll open up for questions and answers and we'll wrap it up. I think that'll be good. So prayer requests for us, again, these are fairly general, but yeah, with the COVID-19 situation, things are tricky as from a ministry standpoint. So much of what we want to do as a church plant involves meeting with people, obviously, and with that extra concern now about when it's safe to do so or how it's safe to do so. We just need wisdom to know, on the one hand, like what we should do from a medical standpoint, because there's a lot of questions there, but then also just in a social and spiritual and emotional standpoint. We don't want to offend people by the way that we do things. We don't want to, if something is safe but people think it's dangerous, we want to be mindful of how people will react to that. So just wisdom to know how to do ministry in this, how we can adapt some of the ministry plans that we had made to work in the situations that we're now. And I think this is something that not just for us personally, but I think most missionaries in this area are all kind of working with the same thing. Second one, just boldness. Pray for us to have boldness to share the gospel. I think that's where we are now. As we've been here in Miyako for a few years, we've kind of gotten to know the city. We've gotten the worship service going. We're working with Christians. We're reaching out to non-Christians through the English programs. But yeah, our goal is to ultimately, we want to see people saved and see people come to a relationship with Christ. So pray that we can have just a boldness to know when that right opportunity is to bring that up, and that we can have those opportunities to share the gospel in a very clear and unambiguous way. Pray for perseverance for missionaries that are serving in church planting, not just us, but many of the ones on the coast. It's amazing that there are these church plants going on, and it's, again, much different than it was 10 years ago. I think it's much less isolated than it was 10 years ago. We do get together with other missionaries on the coast. There's a group of us getting together with some of the other coastal workers not too long ago and their families. So we try and support each other. But, the reality is it's a lot of times it's like one family per city. And so even still, it's fairly isolated. There can be difficulties. There can be issues where kids get bullied. There can be, just all kinds of challenges and struggles. So pray for perseverance and just for, God to really support the work that's going on there. I think kind of in line with that, like our initial plan was, like, before we went to Japan, we thought we want to be working on a church planting team, because I certainly did not feel, and still don't, qualified to lead a church plant or to head it up on our own. But God, in his wisdom and grace, has put us in that position, and that's where we are now. And he has continued to sustain us since we've been here, and we continue to trust him to do that. But our hope is always to be working with more full-time Christians to be working alongside us. And so pray for that too. And then just overall pray for people in Japan to come to faith in Christ. Again, I think there has been a lot of preparing the ground, a lot of tilling the ground, a lot of sowing the seed over the last 10 years. It's been amazing to see God do that work over the last 10 years. But we're still waiting for the harvest. We're still waiting to see, what the end result of that is going to be. And, I think some of it's a patience thing. It's like incredibly encouraging to see what's happening right now. But we still want to see people come to Christ. We still want to see people, get baptized and become a part of the body of Christ and worship with us and serve alongside us and reach out alongside us. But that last part hasn't happened yet. So that's kind of where we are now, is waiting to see when God's going to do that, what it's going to look like, and just trying to work towards that. So we're encouraged in that. So please be praying for those things. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for whatever time we got left, for if there's any questions that you guys have. If I can answer, I'll do my best. And if anybody is interested in following us here in Japan, we do send out a prayer letter. You can email us at daveandtomo@gloryspeaking.com. We'll set you up on our prayer letter. If you're on Facebook, we have a private Facebook group where we share prayer requests and photos and that sort of thing. if you're interested in joining that, search for Dave and Tomo in Japan on Facebook and ask to be invited, and we'll let you in, and you guys can follow us there as well. But thank you guys for letting me come or appear, whatever you say on a Zoom meeting. I didn't travel anywhere to get here, but anyways, it's good to be seen by you today. But yeah, questions, answers. How does this part work? I'm not sure what to do now.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, David.
Okay.
So I have some questions that people sent through the chat, but
Okay.
before we get to those, does anyone have any questions they want to ask live? Go ahead. And this is just open for you guys.
You can stop the share too, so we can see everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Well, one question I have right now that Paul just sent in: when you do the English class, do you use the Bible or Bible stories? And if so, are they open to that?
In the adult English class, we always do kind of a section where it's like sayings that originated from the Bible. So we kind of bring it in that way. And people seem totally fine with that. I think, it's a pretty kind of smooth way, because there are so many English phrases that originate from the Bible, and so that's an easy way to come in. We just did a Christmas English conversation class a couple weeks ago, and so for that one, we read through the Christmas story in English in the Bible. So yeah, so we were able to bring a little bit of biblical content into that. With the kids one, we did when we did the Christmas party, yeah, we brought in we shared the Christmas story there. That one is a little bit less. We haven't done too much biblical content in the kids classes. Again, that's more, but what we have seen is we've seen that people have come to that, have then come to other events where there has been more of a biblical content and more kind of explicit Christian message. So that's sort of mostly our hope there is we want to invite the families to come to the church or come to maybe a specific event where the gospel can be shared, rather than using the children's one as a direct evangelism tool. If that makes sense. That's sort of where we are now. We're kind of feeling our way through this all right now because we're new to it, but that's our current strategy.
And as we talk, I encourage you guys to put your video on so that we can all kind of be present and engaged. One more question that I have is kind of relating to that. Are you finding spiritual openness as you're working with people in Miyako?
I think mostly what we've seen is relational openness, which we're really encouraged by. We haven't necessarily seen that translate to spiritual openness yet. So again, that's kind of where we are now is really praying that those relationships that we've been able to build will result in that spiritual openness. Specifically talking about our couple of years that we've been in Miyako, that's kind of where we are now. But yeah, just the fact that people are open to building relationships with us. They know that we're Christians. They know that, that the events and stuff that we do are connected to the church, and they're open to coming to that. So yeah, I think that's kind of where that next step is. We want to see whether there is going to be that spiritual openness as well, or if sharing the gospel is going to result in a closeness to it. So we're kind of waiting to see how that's going to work too.
Another question. So are the 5 churches that you mentioned affiliated with each other in any way?
No, they're actually all different. And that's been another kind of interesting thing here is, it almost feels like every missions organization in Japan has sent like 1 or 2 units here. So there's a lot of diversity in the organizations that people are coming from, and the groups that they're working with. Same thing with denominations. So our church plant is connected to a Japanese conservative Baptist church. The one in Yamada was started by JECA and OMF, a partnership between JECA and OMF started that one. Down in Ofunato is the Dome, the Alliance denomination, started that one. And then up north in Taro is Dawn Berkner. She's, I think, more on an independent basis doing a church plant up there. I don't think she's affiliated with any Japanese group here. Yeah. So the 5 church plants are all separate, but we try and encourage one another and partner when we can. But for the most part, everybody's each church plant in each city is different. Ours again, so we're GEMS. Kat Porter, she was with WEC, so we were one of the few that was kind of from two different organizations working together in partnership with a Japanese church. But again, she's back in the UK now.
Cool. I have more questions, but I want to give you guys the opportunity to be brave and unmute yourselves and ask a live question if you so desire.
Dave, you're from Orange County?
That's right. Yeah.
What church did you come from in Orange County? Just curious.
My dad is the pastor of a really small church in San Juan Capistrano. So it's called Crossroad Church. There is a Crossroad Community Church in Mission Viejo that's much bigger in the Japanese community. That's not my church.
Okay.
They're a great church, but that's not the one that I came from. Yeah.
Gotcha. I was curious, just you're doing church planning and stuff like that. Like what kind of, I'm kind of looking at stuff like that. Like what kind of preparation do you need to do? Like, get an MDiv kind of thing, or do you just kind of go, you did the 2 years of language school, I think right before, but other than that, like what kind of?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, especially we're in the position where I am now, I don't have my MDiv. I got very little formal education, and I would love to have had the opportunity to have more of that. Again, so like I came into this at sort of a weird spot. My goal when I came was to work underneath somebody. I wanted to be like an assistant kind of thing. And that's sort of where I came from. My church background in the States is I did a lot of work within my home church, served in a lot of different ways, never at the top. And so that's kind of more where I saw myself. But then when I got over here, there's just so many needs, and there was no one else to do the work that I'm doing. And people asked me to do it. And after a lot of prayer, it's like, okay, we'll take that step and see what God does. But yeah, I mean, I think so. Mine was a lot of church ministry. I did a lot of church ministry back home. I did get opportunities to preach at home, leading Bible studies and that sort of thing. I did have, I had a minor in Bible was my formal education. So my initial intent was to work in a missions organization as a computer tech, which I did with Campus Crusade for Christ before becoming a missionary. I was working with the Jesus Phone Project in computers. And so I had a minor in Bible, a lot of on-the-ground experience in my home church, came to Japan, did 2 years of language study, formal language study at a language school here, did an internship with the Japanese church here in Iwate and Morioka. And then from there was sent down here to be a part of the team, and then eventually now heading up the church plant. I think it was me always putting a box around the stuff that I would do for God. And then God always kind of putting me one little step outside of that. And then he keeps moving the target. And the next thing I know, I'm here, and this is what's going on. And it's great, but it's scary, but yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Just want to remind you guys to, in the chat, there's a link to the survey. Before we leave this meeting, I asked that you fill out that survey for David's seminar workshop. And I had a question. So, if you were to plant a church in the future, David, like, so maybe Miyako is on its feet and, you've passed it on to the natives there. What would you do differently in your first year at a new church plant?
It's a good question. I think a lot of it, like, again, it's hard to say because like so much of what my initial plans was again, is based on having more of a team in place. And I think especially for our church plant, whereas, it feels like all of us are trying to figure out how to do church planting for the first time. So we're working with a church in Morioka that hasn't been involved in church planting before. So we're kind of all just sort of feeling our way through it. But I think I would go into it maybe with a more realistic expectation of how things would work. I think we spent a lot of our first year basically just thinking things were going to go one way, and then realizing there was just so many different things that we hadn't thought about before. So maybe spending some more time in the pre-planning phase, maybe having just more realistic expectations going into it. Yeah, but I think, yeah, I'm still working through all that myself, but I think one of the main things would be having maybe a little bit more flexibility. So like I kind of had this idea of, okay, so this is when we're going to write the church bylaws, and this is when we're going to start doing, appointing elders, and this is when we're going to start, taking our first communion and having all that laid out. And it didn't really happen that way. It's just, a lot of it depended on what the mother church, what they were comfortable with. And I think there's a lot of things where I wanted it to be more set in stone, and it was kind of, we just sort of had to roll with it and go with it. But a lot of that, it kind of depends on just the partners that you're working with and who you're working with. So it's probably a terrible answer to the question, but I don't know, actually. We would do a lot of things differently. But yeah, I think I'd have to sit down and write a lot of that out to figure out exactly what it is.
Sure, and it's almost an unfair question, but we have time for maybe 2 more questions, 3 more questions. So I encourage you guys to unmute yourselves and go ahead.
I have a question. This is Amos here. Thank you, Brother Dave, for your presentation. My question was related to the providing relief for the Japanese in the place that, was it Iwate, you said?
Iwate is the name of the prefecture, yeah. And our city is Miyako.
Miyako, yeah. So I have read and heard about how the Yakuza tend to be the first Japanese to respond to natural disasters. Did you have an experience where you met or saw some Yakuza members helping out during these natural disasters?
I didn't personally. So again, we got there in 2013. So after the initial work had been done, I've heard, you always hear rumors about it, but I haven't seen much Yakuza activity in our little town. But yeah, I know that there were a lot of interesting groups that were working in the disaster relief in the initial, especially in the kind of the first couple of chaotic months and in there. So it wouldn't surprise me too much to hear that, but I don't have any personal experiences with it now.
Okay. Well, hopefully one day you'll be able
to
hopefully boldly proclaim the gospel to one of them. Lord bless you in your ministry, brother.
Yeah, thank you, Amos.
Floor is open.
Yeah, I was going to ask David, how's the spiritual receptivity after these 10 years, at least in your area? I guess you're just there, but have you seen them more open to having discussion, or you just kind of got to build that relationship more first to get to it, or more people depending on who you meet, or just open? Can you share about that?
Yeah, my sense in that is that people seem to be, again, primarily more open to building relationships with Christians. And that's the most exciting part. As far as an openness to receiving the gospel, we haven't seen that change too much. People are very polite within the context of a relationship to talk about that and to consider it. But the challenge of taking that to accepting it as something for themselves to take on is still a very large step for a lot of people. And something that, we haven't seen a lot of people willing to take that step yet. So still waiting on that one, still praying on that one, but
we'll be praying for that.
But again, the relational openness is huge. Like that was, it seemed like before that we couldn't even get our foot in the door, and now we can, and we can have those opportunities to share. So that in itself is incredibly encouraging, but that's not the end result. I mean, if that's not the end goal, we got to get further than that. So that's what we're waiting and hoping for God to work there next.
It's like you were saying, there wasn't many people in the area And then so after this, more
Yeah.
came. So the Lord is even using this disaster.
Yeah.
Last question here. It came from Paul. So, Paul, if you have anything you wanted to add, feel free. But what is the emotional state of the survivors? You had mentioned a little bit about
Yeah.
maybe there's survivor guilt. And I've heard in other areas too, in the temporary housing, alcoholism and depression was very high. But now, 10 years later, what kind of emotional state do you notice overall?
I think most of the people in our city are fairly good at hiding it at this point. You don't notice anything talking to people on a surface level. In some of the conversations, especially Tomo, she speaks much better Japanese than I do, and she's been able to connect with some of the survivors a little bit better than I have. But yeah, she's talked to people and gotten a little bit deeper, and there's still a lot of scars there, a lot of hurt. There's people that she's talked with where she talked with one lady who lost her grandkid in the tsunami, and she can't be around young children. She just breaks down. And so she avoids any place where there's young kids going to be around. There's people that, that like another older lady who lost her husband in the tsunami and is still grieving it. And she's living with her daughter now. And her daughter doesn't want to hear her mom talk about her dad all the time. And so there's this disconnect where, they can't share about that. So yeah, there's a lot of, I think, pain and hurt that's still kind of buried under the surface, even 10 years later. And people are having, so some people are really struggling and others are generally have moved on. We don't notice, again, you wouldn't really notice anything in a normal daily environment, just going through town. But yeah, if you stop and talk to some of the people, there's still a lot going on under the surface.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time, David, and sharing with us tonight.
Yeah.
Maybe sharing is the word. Appearing through Zoom, however you want to say it.
Yeah, thank you guys all for staying up so late with me. Yeah, it's I know it's getting late for some of you, so you yeah.
Thank you, really. This was wonderful. We'll be praying for your family, David.
Thank you. Yeah, and whenever the
requests,
travel restrictions enough, everything lifts up, if anybody's in the area, feel free to hit us up. Always love to get company, which we don't get very often up here. So
yeah. And are you connected, as I think somebody also asked, with Dawn in the Rural Church Planning Network?
So we're not part of that, but we know Dawn, and we see her a lot. Yeah.
Cool.
And so yeah, she organizes some prayer meetings and fellowship between Iwate missionaries. So we connect with her there, and yeah. So we've seen her a lot.
I love her heart.
Yeah, she has a good heart.
Japan especially.
Yeah. But yeah, she's just north of us. She's about an hour north of, I think, where we are.
Cool.
Well, with that, we're going to be here for the next few minutes. Please fill out your survey. I will hound you to no end. It is in the chat. If you cannot find it, well, good for you. I pasted it one more time.
You are a faithful survey hound, Tommy.
Right.
If you guys didn't fill out surveys for earlier ones too, after you fill it out once, there's a part on there that says you can fill out another survey, and then you can just indicate what that one is for, and then just in case you forgot other ones.
Yeah. Again, the feedback is helpful.
Yeah.
If you're filling out a positive one for me, feel free to do 2 or 3.
Of course.
You're right. There's no limit. We don't IP check, so.
Yeah, don't dox them.
Yeah, I believe that is officially the end of the last workshop for today.
Gare-sama.
Oh, gare-sama deshita. And do the survey. That is all I will say. Matt, it's up to you now.
Yep, that's everybody. So this will be the end of day 2 of EC20 Beyond. And thank you, everybody. And thank you again, David, for being here and sharing. Blessing to have you. And again, hope everybody, you caught the workshops, the testimonies, small group time, English conversations, full, rich day. Again, tomorrow, And on Tuesday and Wednesday, there'll be a time of prayer in the morning that is translated. So if you do happen to be up early and get going, I know it makes the day a little longer, but it's really beneficial. Moe, the director, reached out to me, and they're going to be praying for Japan tomorrow. So if you're interested to do that, they mix in worship with praying. So it's definitely really good. So
Actually, Moe does it really well with the song sheet that has the romaji for the songs. Many original praise and worship songs that have been written by young Japanese Christians. So, and it's a Google Doc, so you can kind of hold on to it and learn the songs on your own later, you know.
there you go. But yeah, so that'll be the start of the day tomorrow, first thing, and then after that is